To what extent do you believe consumer sentiment can be used as a leading indicator for B2B market performance?
This is a really interesting dynamic. I'm going to flip this question back on you, CJ.
Okay.
But, you think about, look at politics today in America, right? People are saying the economy is strong and the stock market is robust, and look at the jobs numbers and all of that. And yet you're increasingly seeing different politicians talk about, well, the price of eggs, price of milk, because they recognize that there's a divide, right? And people, even though, both can be true, both are very different things. And sentiment plays an important factor in, buying decisions within a company. Are you going to get those different software tools, whatever it might be? But sentiment is real and it needs to be discussed. But I'm curious from your end, how do you see it playing out?
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
What's up, everybody? CJ back with another episode of the Run the Numbers podcast. A bit of a personal update. My wife will not let me get a drum set. So I got a new office. I got a little bit of extra space here, and I just want to get back on that 5th grade grind when CJ was on the snare drum line. I feel like a musical instrument could unleash some artistic creativity that I could use for this podcast. I don't know. So if anybody's got any tips on how to convince your wife or significant other to allow you to get an instrument that's very loud in a congested neighborhood with 2 small children, please let me know. This episode that I just did is with the man, the myth, the legend, Jon Cochrane, not the lawyer for OJ. Is that who the lawyer was? He's a VP of strategy over at Maxio. I love the people at Maxio. They come out with some incredible benchmarking reports, and they sit on this wealth of data. I think they have 2,400 subscription customers who use them for billing as well as SaaS metrics. We talked through the latest benchmarking report that they just released. They have some interesting trends around pricing, around usage base versus subscription or fixed rate trends, and also by industry, which sectors were doing well in the past few quarters and which were falling back, some surprises there. And then we touch on some current event stuff. We talk through this whole founder mode thing that Paul Graham just came out with. We talk about what's going on with AI and the economy, and if there is an AI air pocket going on. Is it for real? And we talk about the path that I took to CFO, a bit unconventional, and how Jon was also on the CFO path and tried to figure out if you should zig when others should zag, as he had a CPA background. I didn't have that. And so I leaned into different strengths while he leaned into his accounting background. Jon's a great guy, wealth of information here. If you have any tips on how I can get a drum set, please let me know. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 38,000 businesses, wow, that's a lot of companies, have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one platform. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're able to peer into the future and seize new opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. METRICS, metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. Jon, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Thanks for having me, CJ. Glad to be here.
I know I brought you on to talk about metrics, but all I can think about right now is Peppa Pig blaring in the background from downstairs.
Yeah, we were just talking about how you and I are in similar phases of life. It's like toddlers rule our lives, not our companies. So
I found myself humming Baby Shark in the shower today, and then I had to stop myself. It's getting really bad. Someone send help.
We have a remix in our house. Instead of Baby Shark, we do it. My daughter's name is Cat, and so we go Baby Cat all the time to the beat of Baby Shark.
Yeah, I've gone deep down the rabbit hole where my daughter will ask for Baby Shark in the car, but we're tired of playing it. So I found a Baby Shark trap remix. So sometimes I'll throw that on just to switch it up.
Oh my gosh! All right, you have to send that to me after this. I'm sure my kids will love it.
I'll send you the link. Jon, so tell us about your job at Maxio. I'm kind of jealous. Do you get to just look at cool data all day?
Yeah, I know. It's funny. People are like, "Oh, Jon, VP of strategy at Maxio. What do you do?" And I think the reality is I view myself more as like a general contractor on like an actively evolving construction site where it's like, what's the most urgent thing that we need to do to build the building, get the scaffolding in place, stuff like that. So a little bit of everything. Right now, I'm heavily involved in. We're doing a lot of work around the payments business. We've revamped our entire partnerships, our relationships with PEs, VCs, outsourced accounting firms this year. I also run our Maxio Institute, which I know we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then, some overlap with M&A, general strategy, what's working, what's not working. So again, more of that general contractor than anything.
I love it. A true renaissance, man. And I've been going through the report that you just dropped from the Maxio Institute, and we're going to get into some of the takeaways. But for those who are listening in their car, about to pull up at the office right now, if they wanna sound smart to their coworker at the water cooler this morning, what are some of the quick hitter nuggets that they could cite that you found from this report?
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody likes to have a number that they can throw out there, right?
Right.
And so you always want to sound smart. So I think one of the things is we're seeing on average right now, like private B2B businesses growing around the 15% range, plus or minus. So that's kind of like a good benchmark to have in your mind. As I think there's always pressure in the startup private backed business. It's like, a few years ago, I felt like everybody was talking about you got to grow 40% year over year. Well, the average business seeing around 15%. That's still pretty resilient when you look at the private markets, but we give you the benchmarks for sure so that you can kind of have a scorecard to figure out, am I doing a good job? Am I doing a bad job? But a lot of it is also about, how should you be thinking about what you need to be doing as a business? What's the right go-to-market motion? Do I do fixed rate pricing? Do I do usage-based pricing? And so to me, that's where you can really start. If you're listening in the car, showing up to the office, it's one thing to try to hit the number, but it's like, how do you hit the number? And we get into a little bit of like, how do you get there in the report itself?
I'm glad that you flagged that most companies are growing at around 15%. It's not like 40, 50, 90%. I think that there's it's not survivorship bias, but it's the companies that are the loudest are the ones who are doing the best. And so sometimes you think, wow, well, I'm only growing, say 25%. I'm actually lagging behind everyone else. So it's good to hear that like it's not all roses for everybody out there right now.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, how many people have talked about NVIDIA in the last week or every week for the last like 3 years? I feel like I have a family member every other day, telling me, Jon, what about that NVIDIA stock? Should I go buy some of that? And I'm like, no, stop listening to the headlines. So, I mean, they're a great company. People say, but anyway, I digress. Yeah, the loudest ones do command all the headlines.
Well, that's also one of my favorite things about the report that you put out each year, because it goes past the headlines of, and I used to joke 3 years ago, is every company thought that they were a combination of Snowflake and CrowdStrike. And at the end of the day, you're probably not. Great companies, but like not everyone is enterprise, cybersecurity or infrastructure. What this report does is it breaks it out by sector and by pricing, and being able to use both of those lenses to view your business allows you to create a comp set that's actually logical, and you can start to make decisions based on what you see.
Yeah, and that's one of the goals that we've had with this report in general is how do you go beyond that? Because it would, it, it's so challenging to just take a look at a headline or a headline number, especially from some of the, the most successful companies out there. I mean, CrowdStrike, Snowflake, we could rattle off a few over the last years. They are the top. They are the best. They set the standard. Everybody wants to be like them, but the reality is most people aren't like them. So what's reality? And then what are some practical things that you can do inside your company to start taking steps in the right direction? We try to unpack some of that in these reports.
And Jon, maybe just to set a foundation, where are you getting the data from? Is it because you have customers using it and it's anonymized, or are you going out through PE firms to source it? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so this is real data. It's all anonymized. We take a lot of steps to make sure that it's all private, secure, all of that stuff. But it is based on real billings data from customers who are leveraging Maxio out there. And what we try to do is take up 2,400 companies, bundle it all together, and to put out some insights as to what's going on within the private markets versus what you might see in some of the public markets, which there's an endless amount of data that you can get on public companies, but the private space is similar but different.
Yeah, and you demystify that black box on the private space to a high degree. As you could say, the N is strong. The N equals, what would you say, 2,400? Something pretty big.
Yeah, over 2,400 businesses we look at, and then aggregate, anonymize, and then try to make sure that we have a representative sample within any number that we're going to put out. So you're never going to be looking at an N of 1 or 2. We try to make sure it's a large enough group that it would be a representative sample for whatever insight we're talking about.
And what you also do is you balance a consumer view of the world and consumer sentiment. And it's not just like purely B2B software. You can look at that if you want to, but I want to ask, to what extent do you believe consumer sentiment can be used as a leading indicator for B2B market performance? I've been trying to square this in my head because I've been in the B2B world for so long that I'm now opening up my eyes. Like there may be signals from the B2C world or from consumer sentiments. Have you ever looked at it that way? Does one come before the other?
This is a really interesting dynamic. I'm going to flip this question back on you, CJ,
okay,
and ask you, what are you seeing in your daily life? But you think about, look at politics today in America, right? People are saying the economy is strong and the stock market is robust, and look at the jobs numbers and all of that. And yet you're increasingly seeing different politicians talk about, well, the price of eggs, the price of milk, because they recognize that there's a divide, right? And people, even though both can be true, both are very different things, and sentiment plays an important factor in buying decisions within a company. Are you going to get those different software tools, whatever it might be? But sentiment is real and it needs to be discussed. But I'm curious from your end. I mean, how do you see it playing out?
I was in LaGuardia last Thursday and I got off my plane, need coffee really bad. I went to Starbucks. It was $7.60 for a venti iced coffee, black, just because I'm a cowboy. But $7.60. Like, at what point do we just say we're not going to drink coffee anymore? What's the elasticity? And and you know what? I wasn't at that point yet. Maybe it's $10, but I said take my money. But then I grumbled about it and tweeted about it after. Like, this is an unbelievable sum of money to pay for just coffee.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I went and bought coffee around the corner. There's a local coffee shop here. I won't name names, but you know who you are, coffee shop. And my cup of coffee was like $4.50. And I'm going, wait a second. It was only a few years ago where I would roll up to also a Starbucks. That's not the coffee shop in question here that I'm disgruntled with. But I think I could get a cup of coffee for like $2.50. And my cup this morning was like $4.50. I'm going, what happened? I used to pay the same thing for like a crafted cappuccino. And now it's totally different. So, and painful.
Every day, and I called it life on the rails. I would take the Amtrak from South Station in Boston to Providence and back. And each morning I would go and get coffee. And if you want to see efficiency in action, go and see the Dunkin' Donuts in South Station. They pump out the Java there, like one after another. I've never seen such operational efficiency. But it used to be like, I think it was $2.80 for just a medium iced coffee. Now you go anywhere, like you can't get a coffee for it's pretty much around $5. That's what it is.
Yeah. Do you want to know the sign of a good CFO? You all are seeing it in action here, ladies and gentlemen, with CJ being able to recount to the cent his price of coffee from a few years ago at a particular subway station. Good CFOs know their numbers.
Yeah, that one stuck with me. But back on the consumer sentiment piece, though, I do feel like with the B2B world, some stuff will get denied completely. On the consumer side of things, there are things like I come from a company that sells into the auto industry where it may get delayed, but it won't get denied. Like if you need your brake pads done, you may wait 3 extra months because you don't have the money or don't feel good about it. But eventually, like you need to get to work and you'll get it done. I do think on the B2B side, we are seeing a lot of stuff that's just flat out like, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that dynamic. It's interesting, especially in the VCPE game. It's like there's almost a game of telephone that goes on where you see one firm coming out with either thought leadership, and then all of a sudden it ripples through. But it's a very quick ripple through. It's not like, say a 3-month delay. It's all of a sudden slam on the brakes. Growth of going from growth at all costs to growth efficiency. We're seeing it play out in some of our our own operational decisions. Do we have a tool to run that part of the business, or are you going back to, in some cases, I hate to say it, but sometimes going back to spreadsheets, or instead of using the fancy survey tool, maybe you're going back to like a basic off the shelf survey tool and then you aggregate it yourself. People are trimming down.
Yeah. I just crapped on Starbucks, but I will give them some credit because when back in like 2008, when things weren't going all that well, like people who are renting very expensive, like WeWork type space, the Wi-Fi at the Starbucks looked pretty good to use as like an office instead of doing that. So I will give them some credit there. On the consumer sentiment side, I do have a hypothesis though, and this is just from reading a ton of earnings calls, that CFOs and decision makers who are about to buy B2B software are using B2C economic indicators as kind of like the canary in the coal mine around a lot of decision making.
Super interesting. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see that dynamic playing out.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. As a startup CFO, the number one question my friends come to me with is, who do you use for banking? That's right. They don't ask me for my chicken parm recipe, and they don't ask me where I got my dog groomed. I'm the friend they come to for invoicing, credit card, and bank account advice. Go figure. So I thought I'd just come out and answer it for everybody on the podcast. I recently made the switch to Mercury because I was losing my mind trying to get a clear understanding of how cash entered and left the building. Financial operations were getting needlessly complex, and that's coming from someone who does finance stuff for a living. You can't manage what you can't measure, so I made the change. Plus, it took me literally under like 10 minutes to go from application to approval. I'm not kidding. It was wild. Mercury simplifies your financial operations with powerful banking, and it gives you greater control, precision, and speed so you can operate at your best. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by the Choice Financial Group and Evolve Banking Trust. Members FDIC. On the report, Jon, transportation and supply chain tech, that one jumped out at me. First of all, because not enough benchmarking reports will get into that level of cutting the data. But second, like they were really ripping. And the report showed a significant spike in the growth of transportation, logistics, and supply chain tech in Q2. What do you think is causing that? Is there like a geopolitical shift, or what are the trends there?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a couple things play out that are leading to that sector in particular growing faster than others. One, I do think from a political standpoint, you see a lot of investment in infrastructure in general. And so if we look at our data set, we do have a heavy population of US based companies in there. So, and you're seeing a lot of investment from the government in transportation, logistics, the Jobs Act, different things like that are playing out.
I also feel like there are a lot of companies who are getting airtime now who are combining software and hardware, whereas 5 years ago, you didn't hear much about them.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Do you have an example of a good company who has combined the two of them?
Yeah. So I talked to Dustin Peterson, who's the CFO of Locus Robotics. So they create robots, and it's like a robot as a service. So it's a SaaS subscription model, but they have these robot fleets that they'll bring to your warehouses, and they pick stuff off the lines for you. And then the second one is I talked to Kingsley Afemike of Shield AI recently, and they do AI for fighter jets. And then another one, but this was like way before like this trend that I'm spotting now, is I talked to the CFO of Fitbit a while back. And I feel like there's a rise now of companies that aren't like, I'm saying like wearable devices necessarily. Like some of them are like a Whoop, but there are a lot more companies now who are combining like this hardware model with subscription pricing terms and making most of the margin off of the subscription. And 5 years ago, like if you weren't just purely software, it would be hard to get an investment.
One industry I've seen that play out in a lot is the auto industry. Tesla's on the tip of the spear with that. You want to turn on whatever feature in the car, go ahead. It's an extra subscription. And you're seeing that play out in some of the other auto manufacturers out there where they are combining the hardware at the car with a subscription service, because we all know the value of how beneficial a recurring source of income is to a business, just from a predictability, cash flow, profitability standpoint. The other dynamic in the transportation piece, though, and one of the reasons why I think this is playing out in that market in particular, is this theme of growth efficiency. Hiring, you look at any company, employees make up 70% of your overall costs as a business, just in general. And so if you're trying to be a more efficient business, and we've seen waves of layoffs happen throughout the broader industry, and there's only so far you can cut before you have to supplement with technology and solutions like that. And so that dynamic playing out where you're trying to be more efficient through technology, I think is also behind the rise in this sector.
I also think some of the supply chain ripples from COVID and from like bridges breaking and things like that you've seen in the news over the past few years are finally making their way through, where companies have gotten funding and are actually bringing products to market to help solve it.
Yep.
What other sectors jumped out to you as making waves in this last quarter?
So the other one that's been, call it the most resilient of all of them, would be the cyberspace. They consistently have just been, call it a juggernaut, where people are recognizing just in the rise of software and companies, you're increasingly seeing distributed workforces, global solutions out there. Cyber is just at the forefront of, you've got to have your ducks in a row. And I think we all saw, when there's an issue in cyber, just how far that can ripple through your daily operations, with the airline mishap, the barbing between Delta, and all the companies involved with that, Microsoft. So cyber continues to be an area where there's just a ton of investment because the stakes are so high, and the downside is so bad if you get it wrong.
And I hate to say it, but some of that spend is a bit of CYA on the part of CFOs. Like no CFO is ever going to get fired for buying too much cyber insurance or cybersecurity products.
Yeah, that is, I'm sure that's one of the conversations that you have every time you're looking at your insurance every year, CJ, is what is our cyber coverage if we have a data breach, or if there's something that goes wrong, what's our protection?
By the way, those premiums are going up. Like they're getting big.
What's the increase that you're having to deal with on a or that you're seeing?
This is just my view of the world, but I'm seeing like 20 to 30% increases in some insurance premiums. Also, VCs are asking for director and officer insurance. So this isn't necessarily cyber, but it's coverage for the board. They're asking for higher levels than they did 2 years ago.
That is really interesting. And that stuff does not come cheap.
No, it does not. And I kind of look at that as, it's not an economic indicator, but I look at it as it's almost like a vibe indicator of how are people feeling here about, the state of the world we're in.
You're touching on a dynamic that I feel like doesn't get talked about a whole lot when it comes to, maybe, you cover this more than most, CJ, but when it comes to CYA as a CFO, especially when it comes to insurance, a lot of CFO's job is protecting, putting those policies in place. Like, what are your top three things that you need to be thinking about when it comes to CYA as a CFO, when it is cyber insurance type?
Yeah, the number one is around data. Let's say you integrate with a Fortune 500 company and you're a smaller company. You don't want to be on the wrong end of a headline if there's a breach and their data gets access through it. So that's the biggest one for me. Cyber is also on the list, which is somewhat related to data privacy. But after that, and people may not agree with this take, I think that running a startup is a risky endeavor in and of itself, and that you have to underwrite some level of risk throughout the organization in order to be successful. Like if you could de-risk everything there, then there wouldn't really be a company or an opportunity there. And I remember talking to Michael Tannenbaum of Brex when he used to be the CFO there, and he looked at risk as like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where like you start at the bottom where it's just like, we need enough cash to keep the lights on, and then you progress through these levels as you get bigger and stronger, and you can start thinking about more complex risk scenarios and put things in place. But this is probably from my perspective of someone who's largely operated in like the Series B through D range. A lot of it is, feeling comfortable every day with, are we okay running the ship the way it is?
Yeah, it's interesting how on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, cash was the first thing that came up within a CFO's mind. I mean, without that is like the theme I've heard all throughout the years myself. It's like you have to have enough cash to keep the engine running.
Well, let's talk about cash a bit. And in particular, I want to hone in on invoicing. And so Maxio gets a lot of data that is incredibly fascinating and unique because of where you sit within the tech stack. Why does invoicing carry signal?
Invoicing carries a lot of signal, right? Because it's a leading indicator as to what's going to happen from a cash flow standpoint. And one of the things that we dug into in this report, which we haven't dug into in past reports, is how does the size, the amount that you send on an invoice, is there any sort of unique insight that you can get from that based on the type of business? Are there any trends in that if you're an early stage business versus a later stage business? What's the amount? Is it larger, smaller? How does that vary based on kind of the size of your company, the industry that you're in, how you build customers? So it was an interesting thing. Invoicing can be a leading indicator to, what's going to happen from a cash flow standpoint.
You brought up size. Does velocity of invoicing, is that something you track as well?
It's interesting. I think in general, so we kind of have a unique view where we don't get down to actually looking at, or at least not in this report, we don't go down and say, what are the billing frequencies or the payment terms. I think that's something that, it's like we could go really deep.
Yeah.
Or we try to make it practical. One of the things that we can see though is in general, we can segment, what's coming from more of a usage-based model versus say an invoicing-based model. And I think it's a safe assumption to generally say the usage-based is going to lean toward more of like a monthly billing cadence, right, whereas the fixed rate is going to be more of like an annual leaning. Of course, generalizations there, but those are the two ways that we can see, we see the world through both of those lenses.
Have you ever seen a snowflake invoice before?
No.
So for one of the top companies, one of which I admire greatly, it looks like it was made in like Microsoft Paint. Like it's the most simple invoice I've ever seen.
That's an interesting, I was going to say, like, do you have an example? Can we all look at? I mean, anonymized, of course. I'm sure you could Google it.
Well, it's incredibly simple. And I don't know. I was just surprised. I guess it doesn't really matter what your header is as long as people are paying you on time. That one has always caught me off guard. Like, is this actually a real invoice or is this something that somebody created?
Or is this a scam? Right. Yeah. It's like, do I click the pay here link or do I not? It's funny that you bring that up. So outside of the Maxio Institute, that's something that at Maxio itself, we spend a lot of time thinking about because the presentation matters.
It does matter. It does. I know I just said it doesn't matter, but I'm bringing it up, so it probably does.
It does. It's funny. So if I go back to pre-Maxio, when I was a controller, we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to make sure that we could just attach a PDF to an invoice that went to a customer, because we had certain customers where they would try to go and pay the link in that email, but they like had IT, going back to cyber, they had policies that prohibited them from clicking on any hyperlink in an email. Well, if you're a company and the way that you're primarily collecting payment from your customers is by sending them an automated email with a hyperlink, you've all of a sudden got a cash flow issue because your customers can't pay you because they can't click the hyperlink. So these are like the subtleties within the billing and collection process that, so all that to be said, these things that you don't even think about can actually create cash flow issues if you don't have a great operation around them.
It happened to me last week. So one of the sponsors
of
this pod, I won't say who it is. I love them, but like you can only go so far with automation. And I thought I was really slick sending an invoice that was auto-generated at the start of each month. So I could like peace of mind, it's being sent. And it would have a QR code and a link for them to click on. But they're using a system that needs to scan a PDF. So like, I'm like, I haven't paid in 2 months here. What's going on? And it was my fault. Like I wasn't attaching a PDF, but it's interesting because a lot of the people listening are probably trying to automate certain parts of their tech stack. But it's like, if the party on the other end doesn't have something that jives with it, it's kind of all for naught.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned Fortune 500 companies. Sometimes you've also got to play by their rules. You know, they've got very robust procurement systems. You have to upload it into the system. You need a PO. These are all, it can get complicated really quickly.
But back to the subscription versus usage one, what were some of the trends that you were seeing there in invoicing?
Yeah. So one of the big things that we saw that kind of cut throughout both models was, in general, early stage companies. When I'm saying early stage, let's just segment it and say you're under $2 million. The amount that you bill your customers, like on a per invoice basis, is less than what you would have if you're a larger stage business. Say you're 10 million and up. That might not sound like the most interesting finding, but when you think about it, I think it reflects a subtlety that definitely goes into CFO planning. And if you've ever had to build like a 5-year forecast, a model, and show how is the business going to grow from where we are today to where we need to be in 5 years from now, how you increase your prices within your existing cohort is really important. And we're seeing that dynamic play out in the data of companies, the companies who get from 1 million to 5 million to 10 million. It's pretty clear in the data that they've found a way to increase their price points to their customers throughout that journey to help fuel that growth, moving them from a 1 million to say a $10 million business.
So they're increasing prices. I guess I'm just trying to make a distinction between average deal size, like because you're buying more stuff, versus increasing prices. Are you saying the good companies along the way, it could be the same bundle of goods, but each stage they're kind of ratcheting up how much it costs?
So we've seen in general, the amount that a $10 million company on average will bill out to their customers is going to be larger on a per invoice basis than what, say, a $1 million company would send out to their customers. So the hypothesis being that on that journey of 1 million to 10 million, the price increases have rippled through, either through, say, product enhancements or, whatever it might be, but you can command a higher price as a larger business than you can a smaller business.
That seems to check out. That seems to make sense. And also, hopefully you're adding products along the way as you get bigger too, so you can go multi-product.
Yeah, totally. So it's, but I remember, I think back to, especially when it comes to budgeting, planning, stuff like that, we would model in, if we can collect, say, just a 5% increase across all of our customers, how much pressure that alleviates on the new sales side of the house. Because if you're just trying to grow through new sales versus keeping all of your customers flat, that really, especially if you're doing like a bottoms up or capacity based model within like your sales organization, having some sort of systematic way to increase prices is a very critical part of any planning.
Jon, you brought up 5-year planning. I think where a lot of long range plans go off the rails is the assumption around average deal size, especially by segment. Like what are we going to be able to charge? I'm making it up, the enterprise in 3 years.
Yeah, I'm curious, CJ. How do you navigate that? I mean, the assumptions in a model are,
Well, often I've gotten over my skis with being overly ambitious with how many products we'll have by then, and usually I'm like 18 months perennially behind where we'll be in my optimism. What I've learned is that you can kind of look at economic indicators of how much inflation has gone up each year, and that can kind of be your baseline. And then from there, you can figure out an attach rate for how many products companies are going to buy. But like I said, it is difficult. Like if you're at $15,000 average deal size today, to figure out, all right, in 3 years, would I be able to get 45,000 per customer? That seems pretty aggressive. What are the reasons why you think you can get that? And I bring up average deal size because it's linked to the whole price times quantity thing. If you're trying to figure out how many deals like a rep actually has to get over the line, that's what impacts your sales capacity model. So the reason why I've messed up on this, it's not necessarily that the amount per account is wrong. It's we were using that because we didn't want to believe that each rep would have to do, and making it up like 80 deals in a year, which is like physically impossible.
Yeah, this brings up a really interesting challenge for companies. It's so when you're trying to pull together, that 5-year forecast, like you're saying, CJ, okay, well, easy. We're going to show growth. What we're going to do is we're just going to increase our prices, and therefore we're going to, we're going to fuel growth that way, or that's how we're going to hit our forecast. But a dynamic that not everybody thinks about is if you increase your prices too much, especially within this economic environment, you can also invite a lot of competition in at the lower end of the market, which could actually really work against you. So it's like you have to balance, you got to balance both within the whole equation here.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of usage-based companies got fat and happy on contracts that would just balloon over time and go up with, like, say, something like a value metric linked to data usage, and data just keeps going up. But eventually it invited competition. There was something cheaper, and customers churned out the top because it became too much.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're a usage-based company, that is the benefit to that model is when times are good, it's the best of times. But then when times are bad, it's the worst of times because people pull back to get out of the contracts really quickly, or they pull back usage, and all of a sudden you come cratering down to earth. And we've observed that dynamic in the Institute report. One of the other things that when it comes to the average invoice size, I call this more of like tying it back to our consumer sentiment conversation, is we do see breakpoints in what is the average price point that people offer out there. So I think I remember looking, I go back to like college days and some of the studies, and I remember that there was a lot of research around the psychological aspect of having a price of around $24.99 versus a price of $25. And we see a little bit of that in the data here, whereas, there are clear, and you'll see this in the report, there are clear kind of spikes in the quantities around $100, $1,000, and $10,000, depending on like if you're a use-based business or an invoice or a fixed rate business. It's really interesting to see how there are like clear breakpoints in the data that I think aligns more so to like your go-to-market strategy and kind of having a price which just from a sentiment standpoint feels right.
I also wonder if some of it is the outcome of like, let's say the economy isn't that great and you look at all the things that you're paying for, the things that maybe like 5,000, 10,000, up to 20,000, a CFO may be like, okay, cool, we can pay for those. It's like, it makes people happy. It helps them be productive. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have something like a NetSuite or Workday or Snowflake that's core to your infrastructure, and that costs like 200,000, 300,000. You need it to run. Like it's just imperative to all your workflows. So that's not going anywhere. But then you have this messy middle where you have something that's like a 50 to 150,000, and I'm making up numbers here, but that's where you start to sink your teeth in and be like, whoa, this is like actually a lot of money we're spending. Is this something maybe we don't need? So you see companies who, like I said, maybe selling something for 10,000, they're more resilient. And then the same thing on the other end where it's more expensive, but it's infrastructure.
What's going to get, I'm curious from your standpoint, CJ, what is, every CFO likes to put in some sort of threshold where it's like anything over this, you got to come to me. Like, how do you have kind of a threshold in your mind? And is that threshold lower than where it used to be?
I think there's a matrix by company stage. So my sniff test is probably going to be a lot more rigorous where I am versus someone who's operating a public company. But I mean, anything over $10,000, like I'm digging into. And If times are better, honestly, maybe it'll be 15. But right now, anything that's 5 figures, I'm digging into.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. 10K is where it really starts to hit the P&L and can hurt, especially at scale. If you think of all the different tools, it always would shock me whenever we would do our planning and forecasting, and we would just try to do a quick audit of how many subscription tools are we actually paying for, and what's the average price, and then you stack rank them from the top to the bottom. And like you were saying, your more utility plays, such as like, you got to keep the lights on with AWS, Snowflake, whatever it is to run the infrastructure. They're going to be at the top with the highest price point, but then once you get to that 10 grand,
the only place I can truly move the needle, like it's almost not even worth it for me to cut something that's $8,000. Like, yes, you shouldn't have shelfware, but it's not going to move the needle as meaningfully as me cutting something that's $38,000 that I feel like isn't being used.
Right. Totally.
What else did you see in terms of trends with usage-based and fixed subscription pricing?
Yeah. So one other thing that we've observed, and we focus on this for a few reports now, is just the dynamic that plays out depending on where you are in your stage of growth as a business. So if you're an early stage business, we define that pretty much as you're $1 million or less. Trying to break past $1 million seems to be the first real clear hurdle in like any sort of business evolution stage. And the way that we've seen most companies break through, at least from our data standpoint, is through fixed rate contracts. Like, okay, I'm going to sign up. Going back to our conversation here, it's like you can sign up a number of businesses at 10 grand per month. So you're getting buy-in. You know what the billing schedule is, but it's like a negotiated, in general, larger scale or a larger contract. Contrast that with a usage-based business. Those companies have really struggled over the last. We've seen a little bit of a rebound, particularly in 2024, which is, I would say, a sign of better times to come within the consumption-based market. But pre-2024, if you were a usage-based business in that under 1 million cohort, it was a really, really challenging time for you to be succeeding, and we just weren't seeing as much momentum under $1 million from a growth rate standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also wonder if there's a simplicity factor to it as well. Like, let's just sell something here, and the easiest way to price this is subscription. The easiest way to explain it to people is subscription. And then after that, we can optimize when we actually have data on it.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, you're an early stage business. You're kind of doing whatever it takes to get to that next stage of growth. You throw it on whatever will sell. You're trying to find a way to fuel the growth there. And then once you get over that, that's where we see the dynamic shift. And is it fixed rate? Is it usage based? What's the right way to monetize? And the answer is it depends. But one of the things that we have seen is, in general, companies who adopt usage-based pricing over $1 million and particularly above $10 million have higher growth rates on average than those who just are fixed rate focused.
I'm not sure if you track this in the data, so it may just be an anecdotal observation that you come up with here, but I'm wondering if you are seeing more companies move from subscription to usage-based or usage-based to subscription, or maybe it's something in the middle that's hybrid.
I think that's been the question to be asked within the B2B subscription space over the last few years. A firm that's done a lot of research on this is OpenView. I know that they have a whole survey and stuff, and they've been putting out data about this for a while, survey-based data on it. What we've seen in our data is, I think it's somewhere in the middle, where companies are finding a way to embrace both. Now, the challenge is, can you do that at scale? That's kind of a different operational question. But I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle, and companies are more often deploying some sort of hybrid-based strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, did you say you started your career in accounting?
You know it, CPA by trade. Wow. So is that that's where you started too?
I was at PwC, but I was doing advisory stuff, which basically meant I walked around and stapled PowerPoint slides. I was like pretty useless.
I used to be pretty mean on the copying and scanning machine back in my EY days. I could, unstaple, scan, restaple documents like it was my job.
I know you're saying it as a joke, but that took like a lot of skill. Navigating those, like the tiny little screen with the digital read on it and trying to figure out how to do it. And you have to go through a specific sequence of steps in order to get it right. And you wanted to make sure that you didn't make 50 copies of something before you tried one or two before.
Yeah, I wonder. I've been a little over a decade removed from those that muscle memory there, but that used to be one of the first things that you would cut your teeth on was the old scanning machine, staple machine. There was always the offices had the real big fancy machines, and you would have the senior on your engagement would walk over and walk you through how to use the printer, the scanner. If you were lucky, you were actually able to save your email on the scanner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because then you didn't have to type your email in all the time to send you copies of whatever you're scanning, on the client side. But if you were unlucky, you just had to be really quick on the 10 key of the scanner. But these
That's a throwback. They had like a contact Rolodex in there, and a couple of times I would send it to like Chris Gustafson instead of Carl Gustafson. So that was kind of awkward when you got like a random client engagement packet. Don't tell anybody.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's interesting though, CJ. I don't know if we want to flip here a little bit, but
Sure,
you talk about your path kind of getting to CFO. I know that was one thing that has I feel like that's changed over the last few years. You said you started your journey in more advisory services and navigated your path to CFO, but I think, for early budding accountants, how do they get to be a CFO these days?
Well, I think the first thing, if anybody's listening who's still in college, is they didn't do a very good job of telling people like you and me that you could have a career doing finance type stuff at startups or at tech companies. Like I thought you had to be a coder to work at a tech company. I thought the only options coming out of college were either be an investment banker or work for a big four. Like I didn't know what FP&A was. I couldn't tell you what it stood for at the time. Did you know that, like, coming out of college?
No, I feel like what you described to me was kind of a similar path where I was a business major. I took an accounting course. I happen to have a niche for it. But to me, if you're an accounting major, there's only one path, and that's kind of big four or one of the regional firms. It's like, just the cattle are herded right into the one of those companies. There was no other way. And then all those companies would lay out, their well-articulated career path for how you actually can get to like the next stage of growth within your career. But that was the only way I knew. There was no other startups. What were those? Those were like super risky. And, mom and dad are going to be like, no, CJ, don't go down that path. Go to the big firm where it's stable and you're going to have a good career for your toddlers. And
yeah, I think my parents are still kind of surprised. Like they think it's cool, but one, they have no true idea like what working at a startup and doing finance is. I mean, it does change at every company, but like to your point, you did feel like you're being herded. And then I think once I got there, what I appreciate is that I learned how to be a professional. And we joke about like the copy and printer stuff, but it's more like showing up to work on time, doing like the things that aren't as glorious, learning how to write a good email, learning how to conduct yourself like at a social event, learning how to pack a suitcase for a trip and not packing both black and brown shoes. Those are the things that I think I got the most from being at a big firm. But like I knew pretty quickly that my personality wasn't going to be long for that world. And I got a chance to go over to the private equity side for a bit. And that was cool just to learn how companies make money. I didn't even know what subscription was at the time. And I went deep into that world. And then I think I was probably, to be honest, like a B-, maybe a C+ at the private equity world. And then I found kind of my own product market fit, like once it came to being an operator.
That's super interesting. Before I shifted and kind of came into this role at Maxio recently, I was I was still following the path that had been charted out of school for me, where it was go work at a big four firm, do audit, realized I didn't like audit a few years in, switched to consulting, was going down that path, and then ultimately went to a private company. And really, my background was in, still a CPA, very heavy accounting upbringing. I remember reaching this point a few companies in where, one of the next steps to me was going, say, VP of finance and then hopefully CFO. But I had this, call it existential crisis, where as me, the CPA controller within a company, I looked to the next few steps ahead of me, and the CFOs I'm working for, none of them are CPAs.
Yeah, I'm not a CPA.
Right. And it was like this, I remember like rewind a number of years and I'm going, oh my gosh, how do I get from this path I'm on? I'm at the end of that path. To go to the next level, there's a skill set that I'm not, like, that is not aligned here. And to move to that next level, it's like, okay, the accounting chops will only get you so far. There's a whole other side to it that you need to be a CFO. And I'm curious if you can shed a little bit of light on, like, okay, accounting chops are like the table stakes, but there's a whole different world that the CFOs live in now, where, the accounting chops rewind 20 years. That might have been the path to CFO. Today, that's not the path.
No, to your point, I feel like I timed it right, because I don't have the same accounting depth that a lot of people do. But I think when I was looking for a job, it was definitely, I don't know, an emphasis on CFOs that are actually more like a COO at heart. And that's where my skills were, doing sales operations, doing like 5-year forecasting, doing FP&A. And so I did have to admit on day one, I needed to hire a kick-ass controller, because it's not the world I came from. Like, I still have to be very good at knowing how money enters and leaves the building and the operations there. So filling in my weaknesses or blind spots, you could say, was a focus. But I think I just got lucky with timing it right, of like people whose skills I think were more like mine were attractive to smaller companies who may be going through fundraising rounds, who may be figuring out how to deploy quota. Like, those things were more core to what they did than just closing the books.
Yeah, that's certainly what I'm seeing, is like the best CFOs out there. They are totally operationally minded. Like, they can understand the go-to-market model, how you fuel the growth of business versus just backward-looking accounting. Like, you can hire a really stable and solid controller to handle that piece for you, so that you can focus everything kind of on the forward-looking parts of the business.
Yeah, I also think there's a cash management aspect to it as well. Like, I got some experience doing treasury, which was helpful, but I definitely didn't become an expert in that time. And I think when you get to the later stage companies who are throwing off a lot of cash, then you probably do need someone who is more accounting focused to figure out how to manage that.
Super, super interesting.
Any surprising stories though from the audit career, or anything interesting there?
So looking back, if I were to give, little college Jon some advice as to, where do you want to go in your budding career, starting at one of the big firms or one of the regional firms is not the worst place, because you get exposure to a lot of different types of business, a lot of different types of businesses. You see kind of how the nature of the business is run. All that to be said, I got to see a lot of different types of businesses. In my tour of duty in accounting, I got to see cadavers at one company that did
dead people.
They were dead people, but it wasn't the whole person. It was just parts of the person that they would. Is that? Yeah,
Keep
it was
going.
just
more.
Yeah,
I need to know more.
Right. So, fun fact for those of you that are really curious about the biosciences space, I was at a spinal manufacturing company, and the last thing you want is, if you have a spine issue, you don't want the doctor using your spine as the first thing they've ever installed on. So they get those and they practice inserting the spinal implants on cadavers. And that was one of the CFO's the CEO's favorite day, was when he got to burst into the audit room at the time and say, "Today's the day." And he would gather up all like the first or second years who are fresh out of college, and he was like, "Come with me." And he would take us into the operating room and see which one of us would get queasy first.
Yeah.
Right. So he loved it. It was like he lived to just see us all get really squeamish. And so that was probably one of the more wild engagements I'd ever been on.
I did, like I said, the advisory route. So I was traveling 4 days a week and going to different client sites. I do have to say, I did see a lot of business models or companies that I would not want to work for.
You do. Yeah, you do really get to see a lot. And there are a lot of personalities along the way. And,
And I think that was it. It was less about the company and their business model. It was more just about like, oh, wow, this is like the corporate America from movies. I didn't know this was actually out there.
Oh, yeah. The places you'll go whenever you're in advisory or accounting.
Didn't you have someone like break all your pens in half or something?
I did tell you that story. That was another one. Yeah. So fun fact, you should really, I think this extends beyond accounting. You really, if you're going to work at any business, you should probably know who their competitors are. Apparently, This one customer I went to, they were in the plastics business, and one of their product lines was manufacturing pens. And I happened to bring a competitor's pen into the room, and this person had a fine-tuned eye for the name of the brand of pens, and so the pens I were using were not their pens, and my pens didn't live to see another day. They were all broken in half, and that replaced promptly with that company's pens.
Wow. Yeah, the details matter in that scenario.
Yeah, it was a little jarring though. You got to remember, I am like newly out of school, little innocent, wide-eyed, just trying to show up to meetings on time, do a good job, the best I can. And so to have your client come over your right shoulder, grab your pen, snap them in half, and replace them is a moment you don't forget.
So we both find ourselves coming from originally this accounting type world to tech, and all the news right now is this thing called founder mode. Have you read that?
Yeah. Well, yes, that is like all the rave hot off the press within the last few weeks. I
think I'm stupid. Is founder mode just talking to people who don't report to you?
I think, for any of you who don't understand what CJ and I are talking about, there's this person, Paul Graham. He's like a sage within Silicon Valley.
He's wonderful, by the way. I read all his stuff. Like, I'm a disciple of his work because I write online too. Like, I look up to him in a big way.
Yeah, no, he is kind of the who's who, the person who has guided some of the most successful companies in America that are just transformative, like Airbnb, et cetera, really influential in Y Combinator. Anyway, he came out with an article within the last week called Founder Mode, and it's making its rounds on LinkedIn. And it's kind of talking about the dynamic of, if you're in this tech world, there's this special, call it secret sauce of founder mode that just is not within the traditional VCPE playbook, where it's like business is growing, okay, bring in professional managers and then just let them, take your secret sauce and bring it to the next level because they know how to scale it. He really highlights, and Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, gave a talk about that and how sometimes it's just not going to work. You actually lose some of the magic that a startup company can have and that special secret sauce that you may have. And I've seen this play out in different companies, from, just transformative founders. You try to hand the reins over, it starts, losing its way, only to bring back, the heroic founder. I mean, Steve Jobs, probably the best example of that, with the transformation that he went through with Apple. And so you see a lot of people talking about founder mode. What is founder mode? How do you do founder mode? My best articulation of it is, their founder mode is not just for founders. It's really for, I think there are special people within every company who have that unique ability to really have that connection between what is our special sauce as a business that's made us different. How does that connect to our customers? How does it connect to our operations? These are the people that, if you can identify them, you need to hold on to them at all costs, and then find ways to have them, say, unlock some of that magic sauce within the company. But is there an exact playbook for that? No, it's not. It's one of those things that I think each company needs to figure out. But it's one of those things where if you don't have that, you might not have that true transformative, unique thing that can produce the returns that everybody wants.
Yeah. And my biggest takeaway from it too is that don't listen to everybody's advice. Like, if you've built something great, there could be a lot of people, A, they may have ulterior motives of why they're giving you that advice, and B, they may not have actually ever been like a founder who's taken something from like 0 to 100 million. I've never done that, so I shouldn't be giving you advice if you're a founder who has. And so that resonated with me. Like, if you've gotten it to this point as a founder, like, respect. You should still listen to your gut a lot of the times. Yeah.
No, that is, it can be a lonely spot to be the person who had, doing exactly what you're talking about. But sometimes, your gut is the exact right gut to follow in those moments, because it's produced the magic that's gotten you to where you are.
Jon, maybe gearing towards a close, anything else that you want to plug? Anything that you're working on? What's going on in your world?
Oh man, CJ, we're always trying to do some pretty cool stuff here at Maxio. So I would say, stay tuned for our latest and greatest reports. If any of you who are listening have feedback or things that you would like us to dive into in future reports, hit me up on LinkedIn, hit up any of our team involved in the Institute. That way, we'd love to produce some insights for you. But there's always something new coming out through either our product releases or the Institute itself. But it's been a pleasure catching up with you and talking here on the pod.
This is a good jam sesh. We'll have to have you back on. Thanks for joining me, Jon.
Thanks, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.